On both sides, yeah. And it's being passed back from front to back. So feel free to sign in. It's not mandatory. We're taking questions at the end of the presentation, but they're handwritten on index cards. The index cards and pens are available also at the back table, or we'll be passing them around. And if you got here late and you didn't get any pizza, you better run, because you're getting low.
Everybody, could people in the pews push in a little bit to make room for some of the extra folks who need to be able to sit? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Joseph Campbell, president of Seneca Guardian, and also a proud co-founder of the National Coalition Against Crypto Mining. Thank you all for joining us tonight, both in person and virtually. We'll begin the live stream now, I guess, right, Dan?
Oh, it's going.
It's going. Okay, the live stream is going, folks. I'd like to extend a special thank you to the St. James Episcopal Church for allowing us to hold our forum in this space. To our friend and neighbor, Kate Lamoureux, Kate, for help setting up our 20 co-sponsors from around the region. To Dan Rappaport of Dan Rappaport Consulting for the live stream and technical stuff that we don't know anything about. Joey Gates in the dish truck is back in that corner, supplying us with dishware with their amazing service, helping us reduce our impact on landfills. And Kate Bartholomew of the Sierra Club, back at the information table. Thank you, Kate. And the Sierra Club Atlanta chapter, I'm sorry. And Renee Vogelsang of Frac Action for all her help with tabling for tonight's event and helping out with distributing materials and stuff. Tonight you'll hear from 3 experts and advocates who all share the same mission of safeguarding our state's and community's well-being against the growing threat of nuclear development. We'll conclude with a Q&A period where we'll answer your questions and a brief overview of action items and next steps. If you have a question now or at any time during the forum, please write it down on the cards that are provided either at the table back there or when we pass them around. We're providing cards and pens for questions. After the end of the presentation, we'll have the Q&A. If you have a question that you would like to direct to a specific presenter, please note that on the card. And I'll be reading the question so that everyone in the audience can hear the question and pass the mic to the appropriate presenter to answer the question. Please remember to keep your notes in the form of a question rather than making a statement. Also, please remember to mute your phones and be respectful of each other, this space, and our presenters at all times. First, I'm pleased to introduce the incredible Yvonne Taylor, who may need no introduction for many of you. Vice President of Seneca Lake Guardian, founding member of the National Coalition Against Crypto Mining, recently nationally recognized for her activism on climate as a GRIST 50 fixer, say that 3 times fast, and a tireless advocate and champion for environmental advocacy in New York's Finger Lakes region. Yvonne.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for coming. Yet again, I'm reminded how proud I am to be a member of this community where you keep showing up and keep caring about our clean air and our clean water. So thank you for being here, both here in person and on the live stream. Tonight, my role is to provide you with some background information about what is happening with nuclear development in Schuyler County in particular, but we hope that throughout tonight's forum, we will learn why development of this kind is a bad idea, both at the county, the regional, and the statewide level. On June 25th, 2025, the New York Power Authority, or NYPA, and I'm gonna have to be throwing out a lot of acronyms here, so bear with me. That's the first one, NYPA, issued a statement inviting New York communities to essentially raise their hands if they were interested in hosting nuclear development. In early January, those communities that expressed an interest were announced, and the public was made aware of those who had submitted a request for information, or an RFI, demonstrating that interest. Schuyler County was named as one of those communities, as were other areas considered a part of the Finger Lakes. Basically reading this, the first thing I woke up in the morning, after spitting out my coffee, I quickly got on the phone and started asking for more information. Not finding out much, many of us attended the next legislative meeting where some confusion ensued. The executive director of the Schuyler County Partnership for Economic Development, next acronym, SCOPED, was somewhat vague in her answers, publicly denying to the media that nuclear development was ever going to happen in the county. And the majority of the legislative body appeared to be unaware of anything related to nuclear development. So we dug into the meeting minutes of the Schuyler County Industrial Development Agency, or SCIDA, to learn that this in fact had come up at their December 10th meeting, where it was documented that SCOPE was going to submit an RFI to NYPA, identifying the former shop camp, Camp Monterey, as a potential site for a small reactor. At that point, whether most residents realized it or not, Camp Monterey had been placed into a statewide conversation about future nuclear energy infrastructure. Through a Freedom of Information request, we obtained the 433-page submission identifying Camp Monterey as a potential site for a small nuclear reactor, or SMR, small modular reactor. Within the document, Scoped emphasizes that the site has easy connectivity to transition lines, and that there is broad community support for nuclear development. This is a graphic from the RFI. It's not really easy to see, but that's their transmission lines. I'm just going to read some excerpts from the document verbatim. Quote, Schuyler County offers a combination of available land and readiness for transformative investment. Hosting an advanced nuclear facility such as an SMR aligns with Schuyler County's long-term goals of economic diversification, energy resilience, workforce development, and environmental stewardship. Schuyler County's proposed site is identified in the RFA as follows, and I quote, the site's rural character, limited nearby residential density, and history as a New York State institutional facility position it as a potential site that can support nuclear development with minimal land use conflict and strong community acceptance potential.
Liar.
In March, Scoped introduced Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy, or CPACE, as part of the Monterey site update. This is a financing mechanism that could be used to support the infrastructure that surrounds micronuclear deployment. This is a map pulled from that RFI showing the location of the proposed nuclear site. Notice the proximity to the Watkins Glen racetrack and, for that matter, the Sugar Hill State Forest and the world-famous Watkins Glen State Park. As you're looking at this, let's imagine a worst-case scenario of attempting an evacuation plan in the event of a nuclear accident during NASCAR weekend. Another worst-case scenario, we've learned that these smaller facilities are at risk of drone attacks. Imagine how that could play out on any busy weekend in the summer at the Glen. We found a Harvard study that was released in December of 2025 that indicates a higher risk of cancer and other diseases for residents within a 30-kilometer radius of a nuclear power plant. We're still looking into the credibility of this report, but if that is true, this is a map created by Karen Edelstein of a 30-kilometer radius around the site. Notice that it encompasses nearly all of Schuyler County, but also Prattsburgh, Hammondsport, Bath, Elmira Heights, Corning, and surrounding areas. It's a radius that could impact about 110,000 of us. So you might be wondering, as I am, why now and why here? How come we're seeing this resurgence of nuclear development all of a sudden? Our current administration has been relaxing the safety rules and regulations for permitting nuclear facilities. The current president said, with smiling executives from the nuclear industry looking on, quote, it's a hot industry. It's a brilliant industry. You have to do it right. It's become very safe and environmental. Yes, 100%. Conversely, Edmund Lyman, director of nuclear power safety at the Union of Concerned Scientists, had this to say, quote, they're taking a wrecking ball to the system of nuclear safety and security regulation oversight that has kept the U.S. from having another 3 Mile Island accident. I am absolutely worried about the safety of these reactors. And sadly, our Governor Hochul has jumped on this bandwagon, and now we've learned that our own county has too. You might be wondering why some people think we need to be adding nuclear power back in as an energy source. One of the answers is hyperscale AI data centers. As one person said, quote, "To hear corporate executives and government officials tell it, the world is at the dawn of a new nuclear age that will provide cheap energy and satiate artificial intelligence technology's staggering appetite for electricity." Yes, data centers are extremely energy and water intensive. They are raising the electricity bills for everyday people and businesses. They don't create a lot of jobs, and they cause huge problems with noise. In an email from the executive director of Scoped to her board, Ms. McKinney-Cherry writes that in sum, a small nuclear reactor, and I'll blow this up for you so you can see it, could be used to power a year-round high-energy user, which sounds an awful lot like an AI data center to us. But here's the bottom line. We live in a region full of rich heritage and beauty, a region that supports an existing economy that relies heavily on clean air and water for success. We must do a common sense risk versus reward analysis that takes into account the cost, the pace, and the safety of nuclear development in our area before raising our hand to be picked for development of this industry. And finally, this month marks the anniversary of the 3 Mile Island accident, a stark reminder that nuclear power is never risk-free. Decades later, communities are still living with the consequences of a technology that can fail in ways we can't fully control or clean up. As the industry pushes for new reactors, we have to ask, why invest in dangerous, expensive, and outdated energy when safe, renewable solutions are already here? A true clean energy future means saying no to new nukes and yes to solutions that don't put our communities at risk. Thank you.
Tim Judson lives in Syracuse and has watchdogged the nuclear power plants in central New York since 1998. He has investigated safety problems, informed community members of the dangers and pollution, fought to protect whistleblowers, and worked for solutions to our energy needs. His work in central New York led him to work with other impacted communities and grassroots organizations in New York, the Northeast, nationwide, and globally. Tim has been with the Nuclear Information and Resources Service since 2013 and is also a contributing author to the World Nuclear Industry Status Report. He is a co-founder of the Alliance for a Green Economy, AGREE, and worked in the labor movement as a union member, organizer, and activist. So please join me in welcoming Tim Judson to the podium.
Great. Well, thanks y'all for having me here tonight. It's amazing to see a crowd like this. I've been working on these issues for 28 years. But when I started, I didn't know any more than probably most of you who are here about nuclear energy. I didn't know how a nuclear reactor worked. I didn't know, anything about the pollution that it causes. I knew a little bit about nuclear waste. But we found out that there were some serious safety problems at one of the reactors in Oswego, and a lot of us in central New York got pretty alarmed and started going to meetings, and then, had to figure out, opportunity to do 60 years ago. When they announced, when they actually didn't tell the community in Oswego that they were going to build a nuclear power plant until it was already under construction. All they said to people was they were going to build the Niagara Mohawk was going to build a power plant. They didn't say what kind. People didn't think about it. There weren't many nuclear plants in the country back then. And, and people, if you ask a lot of people in Oswego now who were alive back then, they'll tell you that if they had known that what NIMO was going to build was a nuclear plant, they would have fought it. But by the time that happened, by the time they found out, it was too late. So you guys, have a heads up about what's coming your way, and so I hope I can help you get a better sense of what that means. So just basics about nuclear power, about a nuclear power plant. So nuclear power plants consist of what are called reactors. So you might have one reactor at a nuclear plant, you might have several. In Oswego, there are 3 nuclear reactors, 2 at the 9 Mile Point nuclear plant and 1 at the Fitzpatrick one. But that's kind of the basic units. Nuclear reactors are, they make electricity, but they're really blunt instruments. But they basically the difference is how they produce the heat. And that's done by splitting atoms through the process called fission. Same, essential process that you use to make a nuclear weapon. It just happens at a much slower and hopefully controlled rate in a nuclear plant. But what they do is they have to use in most reactors what they call enriched uranium. Uranium that comes out of the ground doesn't have enough of what they call the fissile isotope to be used in a conventional reactor. So they have to, what they call, enrich it to concentrate, increase the concentration of the atoms that split from the uranium atoms that are still radioactive but don't split. But then that basically, the fissioning of those, of the fuel, basically creates more and more radioactive waste. And that builds up, and that's what we call nuclear waste, that then basically still has no solution. What I'll talk about today is mostly with respect to the kind of reactors that we currently have, which are called light water reactors. They use regular water as the coolant. There are other kinds that you may hear about as this goes on that are non-light water reactors. We'll talk a little bit about those. But most of our experience is with light water reactors, and so that's kind of what most of what I'm going to say is going to cover. So this is just basic design of how a conventional nuclear plant works. You have the reactor, the reactor vessel with the core that heats water that then gets turned into steam for electricity, and then you have a cooling water source that cools that water down to keep the reactor basically under control. And while the main diagram is fairly simplified, these are really complex machines. And so you can see, like with the diagram of the reactor vessel up in the top left, that these are really complicated pieces of machinery. And whether they build a small one or a large one, it's going to be complicated either way. But like with fossil fuels, a nuclear plant is just one link in a long chain, what we call the uranium fuel chain, that starts with mining uranium and then has a long sort of chain of pollution all the way along the way. So that starts with what they call the front end, which is the mining of uranium, which produces a lot of radioactive waste. A lot of the mined rock doesn't have enough uranium to be useful, so they leave it there at the mine. And there's 15,000 abandoned uranium mines in the US that have thousands of tons of this radioactive rock sitting there, mostly in indigenous communities. So this is a big environmental justice issue as well. Then the mined rock has to be refined. They take it to a mill to basically purify it into what they call yellow cake, which is the pure uranium ore. And then that has to be sent to be converted into a gas so that it can be put through the enrichment process, all of which produces more radioactive waste byproducts in the process. So by the time you get a pound of fuel that can go into a reactor, you've already got thousands of pounds of radioactive waste sitting at these various sites, polluting the environment. Then you get to the back end, which starts with the reactor operating. And the splitting of the atoms in the fuel, like I said, creates a ton of, like hundreds of other radioisotopes, radioactive waste, that then either get released, so a lot of it stays in the fuel, luckily, but some of it also gets leaked out, and it gets leaked into your water, into the air, contaminates the workers in their uniforms. Those have to be sent off to be laundered. So there's a long chain of radioactive waste that comes out of the reactor itself. And then years or decades later, when the reactor shuts down, it has to be decommissioned. And then effectively the entire plant becomes radioactive waste as well. And that can take years, and over $1 billion to do. Then what you're left with after all of that is still this irradiated fuel that is going to be dangerous to the environment for over 1 million years. We have no solution to this waste. Most of it's all sitting at the reactor sites today because we don't have even a repository program to find a place where it can be stored safely. And so for a community that doesn't have a nuclear plant already, what's also being proposed is that you guys also become a nuclear waste storage site indefinitely. So in New York, we have a lot of experience with this. So we were one of the places where the nuclear industry was born back in the 30s and 40s. And we actually have more nuclear sites in New York than basically any other state. And a lot of that started with the Manhattan Project and making the nuclear bomb. But then we also became a site for nuclear energy development. And so we have, both from Western New York down to New York City and Long Island, we have dozens of these contaminated sites already. And in fact, there was a research team at the University of Rochester back in the 90s that was studying the contamination from the West Valley Nuclear Reprocessing Plant out in Western New York. And they were finding contamination from the West Valley plant as far east as the eastern edge of the Finger Lakes that spread throughout this whole area. We've also had to pay for this mess. So we have borne the cost of nuclear power plants as New York ratepayers for 60 years now. And every decade we've been forced to basically bail out this industry. And that's continued through to last year when Governor Hochul put through a 20-year extension of a bailout program for the existing reactors in Oswego County and Wayne County that could end up costing us $33 billion more over the next 20 years. So whatever's going to happen with this reactor project in Schuyler County, we're going to end up paying for it. Now this is what it sort of looked like for nuclear reactor development. This is the construction of the first reactor in Oswego, where they didn't tell anyone that it was going to be a nuclear plant until it was already being built. So there's going to be a lot of land clearance, among other things. It's also going to be a huge, mostly non-resident workforce that's going to come in. And that's going to have an impact on the quality of the community as well. In Oswego back in the 70s when they were building these reactors, 70s and 80s, they had a housing crisis in Oswego County, to where basically because there were thousands of these workers coming to work at the nuclear plant, housing prices went up and there's a housing shortage, and some people were basically made homeless in that process. And that same sort of thing could happen here as well. So this is the result of what happens when you have a nuclear plant, and this is just a snapshot of the things that have gone on at the 9 Mile Point and Fitzpatrick reactors. You can see the actual diagram over there in the back of the room if you want to take a look at it. But this sort of was my attempt to kind of show where some of the bodies are buried. at 9 Mile and Fitzpatrick, where waste has been spilled, where there's been contamination, and also some sense of the illnesses that have occurred. Because there's a lot of cancer in Oswego County, and if you know anybody who lives there, they can tell you about it. There's been stories, from the earliest days of the nuclear industry in Oswego of these kind of health effects. So, for instance, within a few years of 9 Mile 1 starting up, and it was releasing millions of curies of radioactive gases into the community in the 70s. Farmers were reporting really unusually high rates of birth defects, infant mortality, and cancer in their cattle. And so they asked Cornell Cooperative Extension to come and do a study. And CCE was willing to come and do the study, but because of the way the CCE is set up, they had to get approval from the Oswego County legislature. And the legislature said no, and didn't let it happen. There's also people that, a friend of mine who, preceded me in this work. Her family had a farm in Mexico, New York, just about 5 miles downwind of the reactors. Both of her parents had fatal brain tumors within 2 weeks of each other. You see this, where the site is here, there's these roads, 3 roads that go around it. One of our reporters in Syracuse back in the day, she was interviewing people who lived along those roads. And one of them gave her a list of people on those 3 roads who had cancer. And there was like 30 or 40 names on them. And about 4 of them had stars next to their names. And so the reporter asked the person, well, the stars, are those the people who died? And they said, no, those are the people who were still alive. So this is the kind of thing that doesn't get, basically, the industry doesn't tell you that they're releasing radioactive waste into your community. This is all done basically without the community knowing what's going on, but then you see the effects years later. So what they're going to talk about a lot, when it comes to Schuyler County, is advanced nuclear. You're going to hear that term a lot. But what is advanced nuclear? And the reality is it's a marketing term. There is no consistent definition of what an advanced nuclear reactor is. It applies to, they apply it to a whole range of different technologies, including basically newer versions of the large light water reactors that we already have. That can cover what they call non-light water reactors, small modular reactors of various kinds, and micro reactors. And so, but basically it's all technology that we do have familiarity with, because all of these technologies were developed in the 50s and 60s. And they were tried, and the reason why we have the reactors that we have today is because back then it was determined that these other types of reactors weren't going to be feasible or economically feasible. So, but now because also these large light water reactors have also proved to not be practical or affordable, now they're going back to resurrect old ideas and foist them on us again. So this is a chart you're not going to be able to tell much from here, but this is from a report by the Union of Concerned Scientists that sort of gives an overview of these technologies. So you can find this chart that basically shows the environmental trade-offs and safety trade-offs of these different types of reactor designs. And the net result of it is that in some ways some of them could be better than existing reactors, in some ways they're going to be worse, but you're still going to have problems. The other aspect of it is that these types of reactors, whether it's SMRs or non-light water reactors, they're going to produce even more radioactive waste than the current types of reactors do. And there's some practical reasons for that are kind of technical we could go into. But the basic gist of it is that they're going to produce more radioactive waste per unit of electricity than the current reactors do. So there's a number of these sort of reactor designs that are being talked about. There's dozens of companies that have started up in the last few years to try to sell these reactor designs, but none of them have been fully approved yet. Most of them haven't had any approvals at all, and they're being marketed basically as PowerPoint presentations. And even the ones that were furthest along a few years ago, some of those have already been canceled. And I think Bob's going to talk a little bit more about this. This is kind of the status of where things are in terms of nuclear reactor development in the country. There's no reactors currently under construction. One might be starting up construction soon. But the reality is that for all of the hype that you're hearing about nuclear energy, there's virtually nothing actually happening. but the cost is already going up. So what you see here, this is a report produced by an organization called IEFA. They did a report a couple of years ago looking at the cost of SMRs. And what you see on the red bars, those were the projected cost and the final cost of the large reactors that were recently built in Georgia. They more than doubled in cost from the beginning to the end. And what you see is with these various SMRs, even though they haven't even begun construction, their cost estimates have already increased to more than what was the initial cost of the Vogtle reactors, and are now approaching the final cost without having even broken ground yet on any of these designs. So these things are even more expensive, the large reactors, despite, again, what they tell you in the hype that they're going to be cheaper. So, when it comes to solving our energy needs, we ask the question, do we need to nuke the climate? And, our response is that no, it's too dirty, too dangerous, too expensive, and too slow, and there are too many, environmental justice impacts to justify it. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Tim, and thanks for coming to our little bird of Watkins Glen from Syracuse. Now it's a privilege and an honor for me to introduce our next speaker. Bob Howarth is an Earth Systems scientist with a PhD jointly from MIT and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. He's been a tenured professor at Cornell for more than 40 years and is a member of the New York State Climate Action Council. His peer-reviewed papers have been cited more than 95,000 times in other peer-reviewed literature, making him one of the most cited environmental scientists in the world. And please welcome Dr. Howarth to the podium. We're really blessed to have you.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you all for coming tonight. I'm going to give you a similar perspective, cover some of the same material as Tim, but I'm going to start, I'm a climate scientist, and I'm going to start with the climate, and if I thought the nuclear power was necessary to solve climate, I would be for it. That's not the case. That's my starting point. Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you. Yep. This is from the IPCC, the United Nations science group that looks at climate and has for decades. This is from their last synthesis report from 2021-2022, and this is the final two sentences of the executive summary. Climate change is real. It's an imminent threat to human society and to the planet as we know it. There's still time to address that, but we're running out of time. We have a shortening window in which we need to deal with climate. So what do? We need to move away from fossil fuels. We need to do that as quickly as we possibly can. And we do not want to substitute in nuclear power, in my opinion. Nuclear power is a dangerous distraction. It's an opportunity cost. It's going to keep us hooked on fossil fuels for the indefinite future, even if we didn't have the waste problems and the public health problems that Tim talked about. It still would be a bad idea. We do have an alternative, and this is a paper that Mark Jacobson of Stanford's the first author on. I'm very proud to be the second author of it. We published this 13 years ago. It's a peer-reviewed study laying out a plan for the state of New York to move to a completely fossil fuel-free future over a time period of around 30 years. And the idea is to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels. For energy, we need wind, solar, and hydro. That's all we need. It does not call for nuclear power. It calls for heat pumps, beneficial electrification of heating, electrification of transportation, that's all more efficient, so energy demand goes down. It's all doable. We calculated 13 years ago that it was cost effective for New York to move ahead at that time frame to do so. The economics have only become more favorable. And I want to say our paper had a lot of impact. We wrote a subsequent plan for the state of California. Mark Jacobson, who's in this photo, has gone on and made plans for every state and virtually every country in the world. And set up the Solutions Project. This is a meeting we had at Cornell back in 2014 to get that going. Mark Ruffalo's in that picture, if you see him, as well as my colleague Tony Ingraffia. And we've had some success. Our paper also provided some of the intellectual underpinnings, the technical underpinnings to the climate law, the CLCPA that passed finally in 2019 and set aggressive climate goals for the state. We showed it could be done. The plan calls for actually doing it. The climate action law, the CLCPA, set very ambitious goals. It said we should cut greenhouse gas emissions from all economic sectors across the state by 40% by 2030, by 85% by 2050. There are many other aspects of that. Didn't say precisely how to do so, and instead it called for setting up this commission called the Climate Action Council, which is 22 people. I'm a member of that, and these are the other members. The law said that we had to come up with a blueprint by December of 2022, and we did. We had dozens and dozens of meetings. We held 11 public hearings. We took public input from over 25,000 people. We took hundreds of thousands of pages of written comments, and we came up with a blueprint to follow through and to meet these climate goals. I want to point out here that the co-chairs there in the front, Doreen Harris is one of them, the president from NYSERDA. The plan we came up with passed by 19-3 vote. 12 of the members of this commission all report to the governor of New York, and they all voted yes for the plan, as did I. Doreen Harris was the co-chair, and she has since backed away from the plan, which is disturbing. We spent a tremendous amount of time talking about where the electricity should come from in the future of the plan, and we decidedly did not recommend nuclear power. And in fact, there's almost no one. One member of the 22 occasionally make a case for nuclear power, but there's no enthusiasm for it. Well, why is that? Largely because nuclear power is too expensive and too slow to deploy to meet the climate goals of the state, even if it were acceptable on environmental and public health grounds. So we came up with that plan in December of 2022. The council's never met since, and implementation has been slow. The governor, quite frankly, has never had her heart in it, and we are way behind target. The budget negotiations going on at the moment. She's trying to redefine the law in order to move those targets off maybe to 2045, maybe 2050. Instead, what the governor has done is move ahead with a rewrite of the state energy plan, and the president of NYSERDA, Doreen Harris, led that effort too. And in that plan, which came out last December, they were supposed to, under the law, follow the guidance we had from the Climate Action Council. They did not. And instead, they came up with a radically different plan, and it calls for nuclear power because the governor wants nuclear power, and the people who work for it decided that they better promote it if they wanted to keep their jobs, to be quite frank. Calls for both traditional large reactors and the small modular reactors that Tim was describing. If you're interested in following up on that plan, Joe Rom, who works at the University of Pennsylvania, wrote an extremely thorough and extremely critical critique of the plan and what's wrong with it, and I would recommend that to anyone. Basically, he says that the documentation behind the plan is terrible. They did not follow the law, and they are recommending things like nuclear, which make no economic, no environmental sense, and do not work in terms of addressing the real climate problems. He highlighted that the only economic analysis in the plan for nuclear was done by EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute from California, which is an industry-based group. They represent the nuclear industry and the natural gas power plant industry. That's what they do. And so they said, sure, we should have nuclear power. there's really no detail behind why that would make economic sense in there. And EPRI actually attached to the state a disclaimer saying, don't take our recommendations too seriously. And the energy plan passed that on, don't take the EPRI stuff too seriously, but they have no other data that they used. There was, however, NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, produced an economic analysis of whether nuclear made sense or not. And no one outside of the Hochul administration has ever seen it. It was sent to the Public Service Commission. They say they never used it in the final end. I know the people who wrote that plan at NYSERDA, and I am 100% convinced that the plan says nuclear is a terrible thing economically. They buried it. So here's some data on real economics, and I'm showing for the United States the cost over the lifetime of a facility, what solar and wind costs are in dollars per kilowatt hour, over the lifetime of a facility. And those costs have been going steeply down. When Mark Jacobson and I and others wrote the plan back in 2013, the economics for solar and wind already made good sense. They've gotten better, much, much better since then. Where does nuclear fit into that? Nuclear is there, and I think these are probably optimistic assumptions. They're based on, the sort of lowballing that Tim was talking about. But even under optimistic assumptions, nuclear power is far more expensive than other alternatives that are available to us today, and it's extremely slow to deploy. It cannot be deployed fast enough to deal with the climate crisis. A lot of people are very, very critical of it. This is, I like this quote. It's from the director of nuclear safety at the Union of Concerned Scientists, who I respect. And he highlights that these SMR, small modular reactors, that both Yvonne and Tim have talked about, they're hypothetical. There aren't any in the United States. People talk about them. You hear about them on the news all the time. The governor talks about them. President Trump talks about them. They're not there. It's a plan. And a little bit more detail on this, particularly NuScale. If you're looking closely at Tim's slides, NuScale is one of the companies that's been promoting small modular reactors since 2007 when they were founded. They're the only company that has regulatory approval to move ahead with these. They have not built any plants, and they keep delaying and delaying. And as this says, in the time scale that's been delayed, the renewable revolution has occurred and it's producing far more power. I want to say a little bit more about NuScale. This is from an article that came out about a year and a half ago, from the industry. It's promoting small modular reactors, and it talks about the 5 top companies and how wonderful they are. And the first one is NuScale, again, who has not yet built a plant. And you can read the language here, but what they're highlighting is how good they are at raising money and making mergers and all. And they are undoubtedly good at that, at least they were. They kind of overstepped their bounds, and they're being sued left and right at the moment, and they've lost 85% of their stock market value over the last 6 months. Basically, they're being accused of fraud because they've never built a small modular reactor, and they don't have anyone on staff who has the training or know how to do it. They're merging people, right? Out of curiosity, here's what the suit is saying. Basically, they've committed fraud. Out of curiosity, it seemed like they must have gone bankrupt, so I looked up this morning. I don't usually use AI, but I did, and this is what AI said. They've not gone bankrupt, at least according to AI. But they're not doing well either. They're on the skids. This is the only company that has the regulatory approval to build small modular reactors. Stepping back a little bit, this is a peer-reviewed paper by some highly respected scientists, people I deeply respect, and they looked at globally all of the economic and energy policies to see which was most cost-effective to move most quickly to deal with changing the energy environment, to deal with climate. And their conclusions were that renewable plants that rely on renewable energy 100% are the fastest way to go globally, and they're the most cost-effective way to go. all of the above energy approaches that you hear from Governor Hochul and all that have some room for natural gas still and bring in nuclear because we need the diversity, they're far, far more expensive and far, far slower. Well documented in peer-reviewed science at this point. So just a couple more issues to finish up on here. There has never been a commercially operating small modular reactor in the United States. And it's not a new idea, it's not new technology, as Tim said. It's been around since the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's just never really made commercial sense before, so it hasn't happened. It's being reborn as a concept. Tim mentioned that the nuclear waste is greater from small modular reactors. That's, of course, something we have to estimate or calculate because there aren't any of these things in the United States to study. But there's a peer-reviewed study that came out in January, written by the former chair of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who calculated that nuclear waste would indeed be 2 to 30 times worse per unit of electricity generated from SMRs. So, big waste problem. There isn't any solution for nuclear waste, as Tim said. There's not a single repository today anywhere in the world for nuclear waste, certainly not in the United States. And nuclear waste is simply, for the most part, stored at the site of plants forever into the future. And so if you have a small modular reactor, it's going to be a big nuclear waste depository. And finally, small modular reactors are great targets for terrorists. There's a growing literature on this. They are highly vulnerable, hard to defend. So I'll finish with that. I just want to go back and say, the climate crisis is tremendous. We need to do everything we possibly can to address it. Solar, wind, hydro, modern energy technologies of the 21st century are the way to go. Nuclear is not the way to go. It's a dangerous sidetrack that's too expensive and too slow to deploy. So thank you very much for allowing me to talk.
Thank you for that incredible wealth of information, Bob and Tim. We're going to collect the cards for the Q&A now, and I'd like to welcome Yvonne back up to talk about some things that you can do right now, and a brief description of next steps. As a reminder, please write your questions down on the cards provided. If you don't have a card and you want one, just raise your hand and we'll get one to you. There's one down here. And keep your hand raised if you want a card, please. Yes, please.
So I'm collecting and giving out. Just so
I won't say it.
Those hands up.
Keep those hands up. If you would like your question to be directed to a specific presenter, please indicate that on the card. I'll be reading the card so everyone can hear the question, and now I'll pass the mic to the appropriate presenter to give the answer. Please remember to keep your notes in the form of a question, not a statement. Now. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Okay, we can be here for a while.
Few questions.
Well, yes. We were circulating a sign-in sheet because we definitely want to be able to stay connected with each other. We're learning together as this new news is happening. We are so blessed to have these incredible experts in our midst, in our community, to give us the knowledge that they did tonight. But if you do have the sign-in sheet, could you please? Oh,
good job. Thank
done.
you.
Check that off the list. Okay. Okay, so next steps. All along the outside walls are QR codes for you to access and sign on to a letter urging Schuyler County to withdraw their letter of interest for a nuclear reactor. I would encourage all of you, if you learned something tonight, you have a concern, to please read it and sign it and share it with your friends. That is the first step. I think the next thing I would like to know is, show of hands, how many people here tonight are from the town of Orange? Okay, not a lot, but that's enough. All we need is a start. We want to be educating and informing the people in the town of Orange about what's going on, so we're going to be hoping to meet with you and help educate and inform your neighbors about what the town of Orange might be up to. And then the next step would be, we're thinking to get, see if we can talk the Schuyler County Legislature into doing two things. One, enacting a ban on nuclear development in the area. And then the second thing would be, as the town of Dryden and the town community of Trumansburg are trying to do right now, get a ban on data centers, AI data centers. That could take a lot of work, but look at all of us here. If you're interested and concerned about this issue enough, we can put some pressure on and we can urge the county to do the right thing. I know that we can, because we have in the past, and we'll just keep fighting until we win. So, thank you. And I would like to ask Renee and Kate, who are incredible organizers and activists, if you all have any other suggestions for us on next steps.
Well, we're going to be following up with everyone who filled out the sign-in sheet. So if you didn't, it's going to be back here. On your way out, just make sure you fill it out. We're going to follow up with more information. If once you hear from us, then you can respond to us with any follow-up questions you have. I'm sure we can organize a meeting or an event like this in another part of the Finger Lakes if people want to help us do that. We'll have more action steps that people can take. So we'll be in touch as long as you sign here and use some of these QR codes too to sign up to the template.
Yes, that's the other thing. Please, there are also QR codes so that you can sign up to get email updates directly from us. I would encourage you to do that as well, so you can stay informed on not only this, but the other issues that are impacting the Finger Lakes. And then finally, I hate this part, but these things do cost money. So there is a QR code for donating. If you could help us out, it's a lot of work that we do. There's also a donation box if you want to just donate that way as well. So with that, I think we have quite a few questions, so I will ask Joseph to come back up and let's get the Q&A started. But thank you guys.
There are a lot of questions. So here's how we're going to do this. We're going to put this microphone right off the stand, and that way I can pass it around if I need to. Okay, so the first card that I have here is not a question. Sorry, it's not a question. I forgot to talk into the microphone. It's not a question. It says, remember 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and the Japan nuclear accident, which was Fukushima, and the answer is yes. Sorry. Oh, and by the way, back in the 70s, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was looking at the salt caverns up here on the west side of Seneca Lake at U.S. Salt as a potential site for storing nuclear waste, and they decided that wasn't a good idea because those caverns are too unstable, which is why they're not storing LPG gas there now. How will this affect property values within 5 miles of the site? Is there increased truck traffic, impact on our utility bills and groundwater?
Yeah, I mean, mean, there was a study done several years ago that looked at the impact on property values near nuclear waste transportation routes, and they found that there was a negative effect on property values for that. But I think this is also the kind of thing where if they're gonna if they were to build a nuclear plant in the near term, there's going to be a lot of people coming to work on building it. And so, like housing prices will probably go up as a result of that, and rents. But that's not necessarily going to be a long-term benefit. It could actually make it harder for some of the people who already live here to continue living here.
This question is about the landfill and crypto mine. How can we take care of those before we get involved in this? I think we're already involved in this issue. Why don't you go over here with the rest of them? Get out here.
All right, since you brought it up, the landfill, we are in the process right now of the state's largest landfill, the largest methane emitter in the state, attempting to expand. They have submitted what they call the landfill, Texas-owned Waste Connections, has submitted what they call a draft environmental impact statement to the Department of Environmental Conservation. The DEC has not accepted that as final yet, but I implore all of you, again, this is why we need you to sign up for email updates, because when they consider that final, we have an opportunity to comment, and we need everybody to make a comment. We will provide a sample comment for you to personalize and submit. We're going to make it super easy for you, but that is our one chance. That's our one shot to make our voices heard on this issue, and there's so many different reasons why we need to do that. The crypto issue is a whole nother ball of wax that the governor just completely derailed in the middle of a legal proceeding where her own Department of Environmental Conservation denied the permit, the air permit for that facility. She, in a stunning reversal, just gave them the green light to keep operating. So now we're just waiting while this polluting corporation gets to continue raining toxins like formaldehyde, lead, mercury, toluene, all over our farms, our vineyards, our homes, and our lake. It's despicable, and we need to continue to fight that too. We have a legal team working on it. That's another issue. Sorry to take up that much time.
I'm going to distill some of these questions because they're wordy, but is there a possibility that they would be planning on storing nuclear waste at the silos at Sampson? It says Sampson Park, and I'm assuming they mean the old depot, the Army depot. Yeah.
The short answer is I don't know, and I don't think we know, but I would doubt it. I mean, the traditional practice of nuclear plants in the United States is to store the nuclear waste right at the site of the facilities and move it around as little as possible.
Probably just dig a hole in the ground, right?
Well, it depends on the waste, but they often will keep it sealed. It might be in 55-gallon barrels, and you have to, move those around and place them as they rust, et cetera, et cetera. There really is no good solution for nuclear waste. It's a tremendous problem.
I should have said, please print these legibly. How do we get the information presented into the public sector? That's what we're doing here, obviously. And we'll continue to scream from the rooftops. What action can individuals make? Oh, no, you're not incognito. What can individuals make? Actions can individuals make to thwart the development of nuclear in New York, i.e. educate the public, public hearings with local and state legislatures to present the information I can't read the rest of this, but Does anybody have an answer to either of those questions? I think that what actions can individuals take?
I mean, I think there's a couple of different things that people can do. I think one is to contact Governor Hochul and let her know that you oppose this, because she's really the one who's instigating all this. But I think the other thing is just exactly what Seneca Lake Guardian and folks in Schuyler County are doing, which is to to get the county to drop this idea of having one here, because if they don't have any sites where they could build these things, then they can't build them.
Can I suggest some more action steps I thought of, Yvonne, that kind of pertain to this?
Please.
I would just say we're all from different parts of the Finger Lakes, but especially the region at risk here. Writing letters to the editor in response to press, including press on this event that we're getting. We can even help with templates for that, so if you've never written a letter to the editor, just get one of our contact info or make sure you signed in. Or just write one yourself if you're already an avid LTE writer. Op-eds, Dr. Howarth has an op-ed hopefully coming out soon in Albany, but local op-eds are really important. And then just writing your elected officials at all levels, because I think it's good for elected officials to know, and your community members to know, this isn't just going to affect one area where they want to put the nuclear site. This affects, as you saw the maps, an entire region, and I would argue this affects the entire Finger Lakes and all of New York, upstate New York at least. And so, writing elected officials, local, county level, state level, and definitely our representatives at the federal level, our Congress members, and letting them know that you're opposed to this goes a huge mile. So calling them, writing an email or a letter to them. So those are some key things that we can all just do when we go home tonight or this weekend or next week. For sure, and if you want help with any of this, just contact us. There's going to be more action items that come out on that, but just stuff that came to mind in response to that.
Yeah, and by the way, this is all being recorded, and there'll be a link to you can go back and watch it later. The next question is, where would the water come from at Camp Monterey? From the RFI, I believe I remember there being a number of water wells on the property, but I think Tim has a little bit of a take on that.
Yeah, the plan that they filed, says that they would get the water out of wells instead of out of one of the lakes. But the amount of water that they say they have doesn't look to me like it's enough to run a nuclear plant on, even a small one. So I think there's, I think we all know, by now that data centers require a ton of water. Well, the amount of water that a data center requires is nothing compared to how much water a nuclear power plant requires for cooling. And so there may be a reality check here with the county on that as well.
Don't go anywhere. This was really so Yvonne's PowerPoint mentioned the possibility of a geothermal, I think it's called deep geothermal, in addition to the nuclear modular reactor. Are there plans to investigate both? Could geothermal be used as a counter-negotiation tactic if Schuyler refuses to budge on nuclear?
Let me just add one more thing on the water and then take the geothermal. If we were to end up with a small modular reactor of the NuScale type design, again, they've never built any of those anywhere, but their design calls for passive cooling in the case of an accident. And so they say you don't have to pump more water. But the design, if you look at it carefully, is that it just, the core of the thing drops into a pool of water. The water boils away, which is how it cools, and it will do that for 72 hours until you run out of water. And meanwhile, you got to find more water and do something. And so you really need an incredibly stable water supply nearby, and that's another reason it's a bad idea to put it here. On the deep geothermal, there aren't any deep geothermal plants in the eastern half of the U.S. Cornell's been experimenting with making one for heating our campus. We may end up doing that eventually. It looks to be pretty expensive technology. There might be some future for it here, and that I would think would be far preferable to nuclear, but it's quite experimental at this point in time.
And the next one is from Brian at Alliance for Nuclear briefly mention the nuclear moratorium bill. Yeah, I'm not aware of one. Yvonne's not aware of one.
Stephen might know a little bit about it. Yeah. And I,
Oh, okay.
Well, it
Well,
hasn't been introduced yet.
it might be good to note too that in Bob's mix of energy, you talk about geothermal. I'm sure that means both geothermal plants as well as less expensive, because we do have rebates and tax credits for you to do geothermal at your home in New York State.
Let me comment directly on that.
Yeah.
The question was
Just so
what
people
I
know what the
interpret
energy
deep
mix is
geothermal,
that
which
we're supporting.
means drilling down miles underground where it's really warm. You know, shallow geothermal works incredibly. I live 12 miles from here. I live in an 1870s farmhouse. We used to heat with number 2 fuel oil, and 14 years ago we got the fuel oil out of the house, and I've been heating with shallow geothermal since then. It works really great. And for me, the payback period is 6 years, so it's economically feasible.
Yeah, so there is a bill that's being drafted right now to to introduce in the legislature this session to create basically what they're calling a 2-year moratorium on any state spending to promote construction of new reactors. And so, so we're waiting for that legislation to get finalized and introduced.
Do you know who might introduce it yet?
Senator Parker from Brooklyn.
Okay, yeah.
Senator Parker's a champion of the environment. Not sure what the point of this question is, but how many thousands of acres of solar panels are needed?
That's like
It's like a question.
People often raise that, and we'll just lose agricultural land to solar panels and all. And personally, I think we should put solar panels over parking lots and on top of rooftop storage for sure. There's plenty of land areas. In the plan that we wrote for Mark Jacobson 13 years ago, and also in the scoping plan that the Climate Action Council came up with, we looked explicitly at how much land was needed, and it's entirely manageable. And I would just point out that it'd be a fraction of the, it's no more area than we currently have in parking lots in the States, probably less. And if we do it cleverly, it's all an environmental good.
So, what is the rationale for building it here? What is the rationale for building it here? I guess because Judy McKinney Cherry wants one? I don't know. There's no really good reason to have that here. I don't think so. And where will the cooling water come from? We already addressed that. There's wells on the property, but they're certainly not enough to. What, if anything, do we know about the long-term effects on reproductive health living within range of a nuclear power plant? I work in reproductive public health.
So there's not a lot of comprehensive evidence on that question. I mean, the reality is that the effects of nuclear power plants on public health have been inconsistently studied, if at all. But we do have a few studies, and 2 in particular. One is a study that was done in Germany, which they call for short the KICK study. But it found that within 5 kilometers of every nuclear reactor in Germany, there were increased rates of childhood leukemia. And they've followed up with that study on that data. So not in terms of reproductive health, but in terms of effects on children. And then also in western Massachusetts, near the Yankee Road reactor, which could qualify as a small modular reactor. It was 180 megawatts, which is smaller than some of the things that are being promoted as SMRs today. That reactor operated for 30 years, and after it closed, the community found out about all the radioactive waste that they'd been dumping in the river. And so the community organized to get the state of Massachusetts to do a health study. And they had the assistance of epidemiologists from the Harvard School of Public Health as well. And what that study found at the end of it was there was an epidemic of cancer in the area, which the epidemiologists initially thought you wouldn't find because the population of the valley is so small. But what they also found was, and this confirmed the experience of people in the community, that there was a 10-fold increase in Down syndrome. And so there was a concrete effect of that as well.
So this questioner wants to know if we want to push alternative energy to support demand. Is that alternative solar farms? And then it goes on to say solar farm on ag land is also an issue, eyesore, etc. Ruins good ag. Farmers are offended. We need our ag community to support us. Could a better alternative be crafted to win them over?
Is that a statement or a question?
A little bit of both. I think it's all the above, right? I mean, there's wind, there's solar, there's hydro.
Well, I think like what Bob was saying, and I don't want to necessarily speak for all of us. I'm using my organizer voice. Do I need the microphone? No.
You might not be able
You know, I think we all support responsibly sited renewable energy. I think that's a misconception amongst advocates of renewables, that we're just for renewables in any way and anywhere, and that's not the case. And I would just make an argument that there are some farmers who their farm would not exist anymore if they didn't do a mix of solar and farming on their land. Agrivoltaics is like a big thing that's been happening. So I would say across the board, you know, there are some farmers who have been able to keep their farm open because of solar. Those are, you know, some exceptions. But I think that we support all of the mix of the energy types that Bob mentioned. And, you know, there's things that we don't talk about, like energy efficiency. If we weatherized and made every single home and building energy efficient, we would cut, like, by massive percentages how much electricity and energy and heating and cooling that we need in our buildings. So we really have a huge mix from the experts, like Bob and others, on, you know, responsibly sited wind, solar, offshore wind, geothermal, air source heat pumps, energy efficient, weatherized homes and buildings. You know, all of these different things are probably the mix of energies we support. But if people are getting nitty-gritty about like this particular solar farm or this wind farm, that would have to be a case-by-case basis that we would have to be asked about a particular project on the table, I would say. Hard to answer that question, I guess, without knowing what the particular is.
And wouldn't it be nice to be able to park your car at a Tops or Walmart and have a solar roof above you when it's snowing and sleeting? This one's from Dr. Howarth. James Hansen wrote a paper which says that global warming has accelerated over the past 15 years. Dr. Hansen's paper goes on to say that the UN scientists have likely underestimated the strength of carbon dioxide to warm the planet. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. Jim Hansen is, you know, one of the greatest climate scientists of the 20th century, and indeed he wrote a paper within the last year saying precisely that. Most other climate scientists think he's wrong, actually, and that the climate, I mean, it's definitely warming. It's warming very quickly, but per unit of greenhouse gas that goes into the atmosphere, if you account for both carbon dioxide and methane, the calculations were right on from 30 to 40 years ago. So I don't agree with Jim Hansen on that, although I respect him tremendously.
And this one's for Tim. Excuse me. I understand that SMRs use more plutonium in their reactors, and this makes them a more attractive terrorist target. Is this true?
There aren't currently, as I'm aware of, any proposals for SMRs in this country that would use plutonium as the fuel. But a lot of them do use a higher enriched version of uranium that would produce more plutonium, you know, per amount of fuel than the current reactors do. And so, you know, the issues with, you know, essentially, you know, the dual use nature of nuclear power plants, where, you know, they're producing, you know, not just, you know, electricity, but they're also producing this waste that includes things that, you know, this material that you can make bombs out of. It has been raised as a real problem, and there are some of these types of new reactors, like molten salt reactors, fast breeder reactors, that, you know, that there are distinctly greater chances of nuclear proliferation, you know, happening because of them.
Thank you, Tim. Is there any basis for the argument that saltwater reactors are safer? You might as well stay up. If they create more radioactive waste, that aspect of the process is obviously less safe.
Saltwater reactors.
Well, there aren't saltwater reactors. There's what are called molten salt reactors, where instead of using water as the coolant, they use what they call a molten salt, or a salt that basically the fuel is embedded in, and because when the fuel, when they're making heat from the fission, it melts the salt and makes it into a liquid, and that circulates, and then it's also the coolant. These reactors, again, were tried 60, 70 years ago, and everyone knows salt is really corrosive. They had real problems with, basically leaks and operations of molten salt reactors back then, and so they abandoned them because they were just too darned, finding the right metals to use was impossible. So there's companies that are now trying it again. There's a few designs for molten salt reactors that are being proposed. But they also have, again, I showed that chart that goes through the various pros and cons of the various reactor designs. There's a lot of reasons to, there's a lot of safety problems that could happen with molten salt reactors too. And one of them is that, they say as a benefit is that they operate at what they call low pressure. But the reason they operate at low pressure is because they're constantly giving off these radioactive gases, so the system doesn't overpressurize. And so there's other concerns about about pollution coming from reactors like that.
Bob, why does Hochul want nuclear power?
What was that?
Why does Hochul want nuclear power? We need Governor Hochul.
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, we debated nuclear up and down in the Climate Action Council, and most of the commissioners of most of the departments who work under her were not in favor of nuclear power. The arguments just aren't there. My take is she's frustrated. She wants to do something that looks dramatic when we're behind on getting our climate goals. And one of the other members of the Climate Action Council once said to me, the governor seems to have this penchant for liking distant, shiny objects as opposed to dealing with the nitty-gritty that really works around her. And nuclear is one of those things. It's up there, it looks kind of shiny and new. Maybe you can get subsidies from Washington for it, and whatever. Relatedly, she also is a big fan, or was, of hydrogen, including even making hydrogen from natural gas, which I think is a disastrous thing for the climate as well. Climate Action Council also said that was a bad idea, but she pushed ahead and helped get some subsidies for hydrogen plants. Those have all closed down. It makes no economic sense. It's bad for the environment. She does not have a good track record in this area.
So we're running out of time. There's one more question that someone asked, what about liability insurance for nuclear power plants? That might be a good one to know.
Yeah, so there is no such thing as liability insurance for nuclear power plants. But that also goes back 70 years. So back in the 50s, the federal government decided they wanted to promote nuclear energy as an energy source to distract people from the dangers of nuclear weapons. So they had this, what they call the Atoms for Peace program. They were spending a lot of money on research and development to develop reactor design. That's where all this came from. Then they started trying to get the utility companies, that built power plants back in the day, to get on board with it. And the utility companies said, well, look, these things can have accidents, right? The utilities couldn't get any insurance companies to insure them for the potentially billions and billions of dollars in damages that could occur from a nuclear meltdown. And so the federal government passed what they call the Price-Anderson Act, which caps the nuclear industry's total liability for a nuclear disaster at what's now about $15 billion. So every nuclear plant owner pays into a pool that would pay the first $15 billion of the cost of an accident. The rest of it you'd have to go to Congress for. And so the Congress would have the discretion to pay out any more than that. And also as a result, if you look at any insurance policy you have, whether it's your home insurance, your car insurance, they all have what they call the nuclear exclusion clause, which says that, that they will not pay any damages from a nuclear incident of any kind. And so this is what happened with 3 Mile Island was, people were harmed by that accident. There have been people who had cancer. There are all sorts of other impacts of it. People had to go to fight and sue the government to get any compensation at all. And so this is one of the fundamental problems. And what happened 2 years ago was Congress passed basically the final extension of the Price-Anderson Act, so that now it will apply to all reactors built at any time in the future. And if these new reactors were what they called so inherently safe, right, that they don't need to have evacuation plans or containment structures, then why do they also still need to have the Price-Anderson Act liability exemptions?
Makes sense to me. Okay, Yvonne Taylor's going to close out the evening now with some action items and next steps. I want to thank you all for coming. It was an amazing turnout for this event.
Thank you, Joseph, and thank you to our presenters again. I was remiss when we listed the people we wanted to thank. I don't know if Marcia Smith is still here, but Marcia was acting as our safety officer for the night, so at least it's on record that I said it if she's gone. Thanks to Marcia Smith. There's probably a ton of pizza left. Please get some on your way out. And just again, please be sure that if you're concerned about this, to make sure that we have a way of getting a hold of you. The folks in the town of Orange, particularly, we want to meet with you and make sure that we continue to educate and inform your neighbors, because the town of Orange supervisor signed off on this idea. So we need to make some corrections there as well. QR code to sign on to the letter urging the county to withdraw that bid for siting a nuclear power plant. They're all the way along the hall, the walls here. You can't get out without seeing one. There's also a bunch on the table there. And again, sign up for email updates from Seneca Lake Guardian, and we would be very grateful to you if you could give a small donation of any amount for our efforts. But with that, you've been extremely wonderful as an audience. They were amazing questions. I, again, am so incredibly proud to be a part of this community. Thank you.
The gas storage. What about it? I gotta stand up.